We want to try to keep on track, and so I have the great privilege of introducing you to the next panel's moderator, Tracy Manson-Murphy, and Tracy is the executive director of the Delaware Coalition Against Gun Violence, a very important organization in our city, and she and her colleagues do amazing, amazing work, and we're really honored that she agreed to be part of today's conference. She has so many wonderful ideas, and I really wanted her to have the opportunity to ask not just our panelists, but our audience to think about some really significant things that are happening today. And so I really appreciate your time, Tracy, and your expertise. I'm going to let her do a little bit more on her background, but I wanted to steal the show of introducing your name.
Thank you. Thanks, friend. Thank you so much. Leslie is too kind. I invited myself. When I heard the Contemporary was hosting this, I said it is so important to talk about play as not only a gift for childhood and an opportunity in childhood and in development, but also as a restorative factor and a protective factor for hard things that happen. And so I'm thrilled to be working with these two women today to kind of talk about different kinds of play and what they can do for us in our growing life and also the children in our lives, and to help them grow and bloom. So I'm going to let you both introduce yourselves. Heather, why don't we start with you, and then we'll move to Laura.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited. I'm glad to hear you're not the only one who invited themselves here today. I invited myself to be a participant first and was excited to get a waitlist spot. But then I'm happy to have the privilege to fill in as well as a panelist today. So my background is in two fields that you've probably not heard of or don't know too much about: recreational therapy and child life. As a recreational therapist, I have education that spans the lifespan. So that means that while 15% of clinicians like myself work in pediatrics, the rest of my colleagues work with adults in geriatrics and correctional facilities and mental health facilities and a number of other facilities, including parks and recreation and with individuals with neurodiversities, etc. In child life, it is birth to 18. You might know, if you have children, of the services offered at AI DuPont Hospital locally. In child life, I did receive my training there. My mentor and one of our adjunct faculty members at Temple University is the director of that program. She is also dually certified in recreational therapy and child life. And while I've had experience in medical daycare, in acute care pediatrics at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and in mental health, I'm a current educator. And I've been doing that since 2014 at Temple University in the recreational therapy program, where I teach undergraduate students and graduate students who are interested in both of these fields. Happy to be here today.
Thank you. Laura.
Am I on?
You're on.
I'd rather use my teaching voice, but I will use this. I am a school counselor. I've been a counselor for almost 20 years. And as my role, I was in a Title I school for about 18 years. And as my role increased, my focus increased on social emotional learning. And I wanted kids to really learn their social skills. I needed to work with them to regulate their emotions. And a lot of this I focused on with teamwork. And with teamwork, that included a lot of play. At the same time, we all know that in the classroom, and I was specifically focusing on kindergarten, there's almost no time for these children to play. And even I would see them go out to recess, and they would have to line up quietly. So that took 5 minutes. And then they were able to play. And then 10 minutes before recess ended, they would have to come back and line up quietly. So their time was decreasing, and I was extremely frustrated. I ended up doing my dissertation on mature play and the role of development with mature play. And I was invited for that.
So we're gonna do a couple different things because the topic of our discussion is types of play. And the first thing I think we need to come up with is a definition. What is play? What do you think? Who knows what play is? Oh, Jen Bush knows. Come on, Jen, what's play? You gotta be so much louder. Come up here and tell us. Just stand up and project. We need all the teachers. Okay. So what are some of the, and Jen was not asked to say that, but I'm so glad she did, because she said play is up to all of us to define in our own way. So I'm not letting most of you off, we're going to have to shout them out. What are some ways you define play? Not work. I love that. Joyful exploration. Yes. Say it again. Imagination. Yep. Who else? Open-ended. I see one in the back. Amusement and fun. Freedom. Curiosity. I love it. Movement and slow movement is my specialty. So I thank you for bringing up that one. So I looked up the definition of play, but I am ill-prepared, and so my definition is back at my spot back there. But what the definition was lengthy. There are a lot of different ways to interpret play, and we use the word a lot in different contexts. Most of it structured around specific details in specific games, like a chess play or a play in a game, sword play, word play. There's a lot of different ways we define play, in addition to all of the really open thinking, out-of-the-box words and experiences, really, that we were shouting out in the room. Experiences that we're going to kind of get into a little bit in our discussion. So we're going to get started. One way we thought about framing this is about different challenges we have in our work and in our lives. I am a parent of 3 children, 3 teenagers. How many here are parents? Oh, wow. How many here have children under the age of 5? Under the age of 10? Under the age of 15, 20? I mean, they're still kids though, right? They're still kids. And as I think it was Ian said earlier, as long as you still have parents, you're still somebody's child. And so I think we all have the opportunity to kind of engage in that. So we're going to talk about some specific things that we see in the behaviors of the children we love and know, and talk about how play can help us with our experiences in that way. So I think, why don't we start, Laura, why don't we talk, we were talking a little bit about impulsivity and anger, and let's explore that a little bit in terms of how play can help us experience impulsivity and anger in a different way.
So for me, I define play as mature versus immature. Mature play is imaginary situations. There are roles, interactions with peers, and I would even push that to say interactions with imaginary peers, if you've ever seen kids playing and they're kind of taking both roles, and the language to communicate their ideas. So they're really developing that language, and the important part is the implicit rules. That's helping them develop. This kind of play, it requires the capacity for reflecting. And that's where you can use this to get them to be more aware of their impulsivity. And if you've got a group working together, you are pointing this out. I would point this out to the children if I'm focusing on one child who really needs to learn to take their turn. So it's a very useful tool, any kind of play like playing Uno. So,
I love that. Heather, what are your thoughts on that?
So within my fields, we tend to talk about services such as diversional play, sensory play, adaptive play, and therapeutic play. And within each of those types of play, you can address impulsivity and anger or aggression. I think that if you were focusing on a diversional play, it might be something that you're seeing offered in a school. It might be something that you're offering in physical education. It may be something that, as a parent, you're providing opportunities for. It can be free play, or it can be more guided play and have that balance that earlier Jen was talking about. But within that opportunity, you're trying to teach them skills, or you're trying to present them with opportunities to utilize skills such as patience or such as waiting, turn taking. If you need to provide a little bit more facilitation, you might provide a guided sensory play experience. That could be bringing out shaving cream or whipped cream, throwing some color in it on the table, and allowing them to get rid of some of that agita that they might have built up if they're frustrated or if they are impulsive, providing them opportunities to slow down and use different materials, marbles, feathers, some of these that are weighted versus unweighted. You might find a local occupational therapist is focusing on sensory play in the way that I'm describing, and is also used in recreational therapy and child life. From a therapeutic play perspective, these may be children who have diagnoses, who have oppositional and defiant behaviors that are significant and reoccurring. For those children, we might use specific games that have been created to help them address conflict, to help them think about problem-solving abilities. Use any of the other modalities that I mentioned as well. Could be team-building activities, using outdoor spaces or indoor spaces to create those types of experiences. And in therapeutic play, we might incorporate some of the sensory experiences, some of those therapeutic games, maybe bibliotherapy resources, reading to the child about the kids who have similar experiences, symptoms, behaviors. There's just so many options.
I'm going to push back, and not push back, but I want to add on to that all of that should be happening in the K-1 classroom, in my opinion. That, and I see a lot of shaking of the heads. And I became increasingly despondent about the absence of that. And I am fortunate enough now to work in a Montessori school where almost all of that is still in the classroom. And it's not looked down upon to let your children play. It needs to be seen again as a tool for growth.
So why don't you keep going on that conversation line and talk about some of the ways that play can achieve the classroom goals, right? Because we talked about how play is often removed when we're looking at outcomes-based learning or outcomes-based education, but actually play can still help us achieve those outcomes. So let's talk about that a little bit and explore how that might look. Give us some examples of how that might look so we can take it back to the programs we work in, the classrooms we might work in, the families we're raising, and build that into our own experience.
Well, let's bring back centers. Let's bring back the post office. I see clapping. They're writing, they can write out tickets for people who come in and buy stamps. They're communicating, they're doing math. They're doing all of the skills that are age appropriate in a play center. It's all there. Bring back the sensory tables. We have that in one of our classrooms now. Those children are growing cognitively as they play with sand, they play with sponges, they are playing with rice. Other things, we have a movement room where there are still dolls, and there's a kitchen, and all of that leads to achieve these academic goals.
Sure. Heather, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I want
I'm
to
seeing a lot of this, a lot of nodding.
Oh gosh, I want to bring it back to you guys. Pick out, again, something from that yellow bin on your tray, on your table, okay? Everybody should pick out something. If you don't have it in your tray, it should already be near you. It doesn't matter what it is. One of these items that's a play type item. In my field, we have something called activity analysis, right? We have it's task breakdown if you're an educator, right? We have different words for it. What are the things that you can learn? What are the skills needed in order to even utilize that object the way it's intended? Or creatively, what can you do differently with that object that you've never done before? You know, grab a pen, grab a crayon, write on your table. You guys have got that paper right there. You know, think about at least 2 or 3 things that that item that you've picked up can be used for. Maybe it's to help with fine motor, social, fine motor, gross motor skills, physical development. Maybe it's intended to help with social, emotional, or cognitive development. Maybe you can change the rules of what that's intended for, right? And then utilize it in a different way. That's all about what we're talking about, is utilizing play for a purpose. So if we can really break down what the purpose of all of these items is and what the potential these items have for growth, we can then justify that in your teaching plans, in your perspective as a parent on what the value is of play. And then it will help us also to create some guidance and to create that balance between that free play, just throwing in the crayons or throwing the puppets and having them available to a child to play with independently, and then creating some structure that can then help them with things like the social emotional skills, the numeracy and literacy, et cetera.
Right. So I want to ask, and I want to explore this a little more. I learned about myself during the last couple of years of Zoom meetings. How many of us did some time on Zoom? Not as many as I would have thought, but maybe I've just lost your attention. Oh, no. Okay, they're back. Yeah. Okay. I found myself on Zooms getting very distracted. I was looking around. I was looking out the window until I started playing. Fidgeting with something, painting my nails. I was obsessed. I did it all the time. I found that if I could keep my hands busy, my brain didn't wander. And I wonder if you can talk, and I'm seeing a lot of this out here. I think other people experience this as well. Yes? That feels familiar? Okay. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, about how play as a complement to learning can support learning as well. So Laura, you talked about play as a path to learning, right? We're learning math when we write a ticket at the post office. We're learning communication skills. What about play to support learning because it's happening alongside of it? Any thoughts on that?
I can start. Yeah, sure. So I think about opportunities to give you brain breaks, right? Giving you opportunities to take a moment. And people, if you exercise, your exercise coaches are always telling you this too, right? You can exercise for 2 minutes, you can exercise for 5 minutes, and then go back to work. You can do it another 5 minutes, you can go back to work. You will function better academically, and you will function better within your work environment, and children through adults will all have the same result if you take some opportunities for self-care. And so whether that's a mindfulness moment, whether that's an opportunity for fitness, whether that's an opportunity for creativity, taking those opportunities is not selfish. It is not a waste of time. It is actually something that will allow your brain the necessary plasticity to continue and focus. And you can do it while you're focusing. I've always, I think as students ourselves, you might have been reprimanded for multitasking or been told multitasking is not going to work the same way. You might have pulled the fidgets away from your children in the classroom because they are distracted, right? But sometimes those are necessary distractions that actually promote better cognitive thought.
Well, everyone's doing it here. Not everyone. A lot of you are coloring, and I think that's great. I know you're still listening to me. I've tested students on that. I'll call them out. They're still following along. I had one brilliant student who would read and still was able to follow my lesson. So it's not a distraction. It's a complement to what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. The next thing I had on my list to discuss was to go back a little bit. We talked about using play as a way to mitigate impulsivity and anger. What about fear and anxiety? I think we're all coming out of a couple of years where fear and anxiety were sort of running at the forefront of our experiences and in our lives. And we're seeing it in many human behaviors now that we're coming out on the other side of the pandemic, or in a new phase of the pandemic. There are reports of aggressive driving are skyrocketing. We know community violence is skyrocketing. The data supports that coming out of fear and of 2 years of fear and anxiety are manifesting in rough ways in our communities, in our lives, and in ourselves. And I wonder if we can talk about play in that structure and explore a little bit about how play can help with that.
Well, first of all, let's back up a little bit. It's a well-known fact that children who do play regularly are less aggressive, and they show more control, and they have higher levels of thinking. That's a fact. That's in a crisis in kindergarten report that came out in 2009, I believe. And I choose to look at aggressive play as a form of expression. What are these children trying to tell us? And I don't inhibit them. I want them to play and express their feelings, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, whether it's a loss of power that they're feeling. You can guide that so that there is no injury to anyone, and you can observe and figure out really what they're thinking and that fear.
So as a child life specialist, I often look and see anger and anxiety and fear related to medical experiences. Sometimes those medical experiences are traumatic experiences. So, for example, if someone is coming in related to a suspected sexual abuse case, other times it's a trauma related to a car accident, whether it's something that causes an ailment to themselves or to a loved one. And so one of the modalities that we use is medical play. And medical play being an opportunity for them to use both fantasy play through pretend doctor's kits, but also at times in the hospital, true medical supplies to help them to express their understanding of what they think is going to happen, what has happened, what could potentially happen to them. So depending on what their experience is, we bring in a blank canvas doll, or we bring in a simple stuffy, and we bring in those types of supplies as well as some creative supplies, crayons, markers, etc., sometimes paints, and we allow them to go at it with very minimal instruction, because medical play is really about their expression and their understanding, and that can get aggressive. And that's okay too. So as long as the aggressive play that they're engaging in is not harming themselves or others, it is a very healthy and cathartic experience for them to be able to engage in. And sometimes it shows their frustration or what they feel has happened to them, the pain that caused maybe some frustration for them, that comes out in the play. And so, I think that when we're talking about aggressive play as it relates to anxieties and fears, we just need to acknowledge that it is okay and it's acceptable, and it doesn't need to be stopped as long as they are directing that towards an inanimate object and directing that in a way that is cathartic. And then later, at a different time after that medical play experience is done, you can process that. You can process that by bringing out a book from the library that helps individuals talk about their feelings or helps them talk about better ways to cope with those emotions. That might be, a larger breadth of, coping skills and tools in their bag that they can pull out during those times when they have those emotions again. We can educate them, you don't really use this tool that way in real life, right? Your doctor doesn't use that tool like that on you. How is it used? So we don't need to tell them no during that moment. We can tell them at a preparation session, which is a very different experience. That's more education in nature.
I love that because I think as a parent, we often feel the pressure from the world to make everything a teachable moment. And what I'm hearing you say is that some moments are not that moment.
Some moments are not that moment.
And so we'll get better outcomes if we reserve those conversations with the time when that child's in a brain space or an emotional space to really absorb that. Laura, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm going to date myself a little bit. How many of you remember the children playing with the Power Ranger figures? Right? And how many of you had experience where they were told to put it away because you can't play with that in school? Right?
Yeah.
And superhero play. How many have had kids who've been, you can't play that. That's like, mean, right? Because you're rescuing someone who's been injured and I want to, again, I think these are forms of expression. We need to use these opportunities and allow them this superhero play. You can include females with that. It seems to be gender biased, but you can include females by setting up a center with both Batman and Batwomen and include diaries,
I think her name
journals.
is Batgirl.
Yeah.
They're not women in the superhero realm.
And
that's another conference.
And so you can include all students in an environment, whether it's a classroom or they're playing in your backyard. You're hosting them all. It's an opportunity for them to express their feelings of power and aggression and things that are on their mind.
I love that. We talked a little bit about how play in classroom spaces can achieve classroom goals. We talked about play alongside of educational learning can bolster that learning. When are times when you feel like play makes our lives better outside of that space, right?
Like what? All the time, Tracy. All the time.
That's what I was looking for, but
I think I'm more concerned by how much as adults we play and as gatekeepers, as we talked about earlier in the session. How much do we accept play in our own lives? How much do we promote it in the lives of our family members, whether our older and extended family members or our youth? The largest concern Laura mentioned is just this decline of play, the demise of play, the lack of social acceptance. Early on, Jen had also mentioned that it's not socially acceptable. She's always reaching to be at the table in conversation, and I loved that she identified this as a safe space where everyone has a place at this table and everyone has an experience that they can share. Right? Everybody has a play experience, but the question is, when's the last time you identified play? And in my field, play is not just for children. We often use play and categorize it for kids, but maybe we feel more comfortable with the word leisure. Maybe we feel more comfortable with the word recreation as an adult. Maybe we're not even comfortable with those words. Thinking about, though, when you're with your family or extended friends and family, do you play? Do you recreate? Is that what makes you happy? Can you each come up with your own examples at the tables of times that you play as an adult? Can you think about your own parents? Do they play? I have such a hard time getting my aging father with dementia to play. He didn't want anything to do with it. He'll humor me when I'm in town for 2 weeks. He lives out of state. And then he'll go back to his normal sedentary routine. Drives me nuts, right? But we all have our own ideas of what's acceptable to us.
So, Laura, we were talking earlier about a couple of different kinds of play: practice play, symbolic play, games with rules. Can you talk a little bit about those and your in your expertise about how we see those and how those play out in our experiences?
I'm not sure what you're looking for.
I mean, let's just figure out what it is, but I think that I'm not an expert on play, right? So when you say words like practice play or symbolic play, I don't know what that means exactly. Define that for me.
So those are elements of the mature play, right? So they're playing doctor and patient, and that's the symbolic play. And you're using either the tools or they're using their imagination. And there are implicit rules, and they're communicating with each other. So that's that mature play in that role.
Okay. Okay. Yep.
So there are also stages of play that different classical theorists have developed and studied over time. So Piaget was mentioned earlier as a theorist who studied play, and each of those subsets of skills that you mentioned are developed early on in life. Birth to 5, many of those skills are developed. And you don't lose those skills, you continue to build upon those skills, and sometimes children with neurodiversities may gain those skills a little bit later. But once you've achieved that skill, you don't typically lose it unless you have a degenerative loss.
Sure.
And so that's one example of a theorist who talks about those subsets that you mentioned. Sarah Smolanski is another example of a theorist who also studied play behaviors. And Parton, I believe it's Mildred Parton also. So if you're looking to gain education about classical play theory, those are just a few examples of theorists who could help you to build some of that knowledge.
So Heather, you mentioned that the playful lessons we learn, or the lessons we learn through play and through experiential learning as young children, 0 to 5, we tend to embed those and we don't lose those skills. What about when trauma comes into play in that time frame? What does that do to those skills do those skills get abbreviated? Do they get pushed off and we have to continue that learning? What are your thoughts on that?
Birth to 5, I want to extend it all the way to 18 really. But when you are youngest, when you are an infant and a toddler and you have a trauma experience, your experience is going to be impacted by the care provided by those around you. So if you have a similar routine, if your loved ones who are grieving themselves or who have experienced trauma themselves are unable to care for you, whether it could be food, it could be shelter, it could be basic needs, there needs to be a substitute in place, that second best. Those children, like birth to 3, are going to really just thrive based on that structure, based on that routine, and based on how others are coping around them. Doesn't mean you need to fake happiness, but it does mean that you need to take time out for yourself so that you can then go back and care for those individuals, or that you need to find that second person to take care of those basic needs of those children. 3 to 5, they're starting to process and play, and so I also think about grief as a form of trauma, but those kids may pop in and out of play, and they may seem really socially awkward or socially inappropriate for them to be popping in and out of play when something so traumatic just happened. But that's normal, and that's okay for them. That's their brain break. It's their way of being able to then mentally process. And they may ask inappropriate questions too, right? Socially inappropriate questions about what happened to the people around them, or what they heard on TV, or what the experience is. Usually it's something that they've seen that they're experiencing. Those older elementary school students, they may be curious, and their questions may seem a little bit morbid in nature when it comes to trauma. They might be interested in the blood and the guts and the gore, and that's actually very developmentally appropriate too, because what they're learning about at that stage of life is the science behind the body and the science behind some of the structures. And also they're concerned about fairness, right? So now they're like, well, that's not fair. So if there's some type of trauma or community experience, like in gun violence examples, like they're hearing things. Are they hearing it from a parent? Are they hearing it from the news? Are they hearing it from a peer? What kind of watered down version are they hearing? And there's no right answer either, because some parents want to be that first responder to talk to their kids about these issues, and some parents feel that it's more appropriate to shelter their child from some of that education and wait for them to ask questions and then answer appropriately.
And I want to pop in here that we, as a society here in the U.S., we spend a lot of money on toys. And I don't necessarily think that that's necessary. When you talk about simple play, the first play in Piaget, give them a block, you know? And then when they grow, that block becomes a telephone. And so they're still progressing, and they don't need that play telephone necessarily.
I was just at DCM with my daughter, and we were in the science area. And I was overhearing other parents saying, oh my gosh, look at all of this. They had the marble run that was made out of toilet paper rolls that went down to the floor. That's the one that comes to my mind right now. But everything in that space was made of homemade materials. And so this parent was just saying how exciting it was that they were getting so many great ideas for things that they could do at their own home with their child for sensory experiences, for learning.
How many of us have given a child a gift and had the child want to play more with the box or the bag or the wrapping or the tissue paper, right? We've all been there. So I do think that children are naturally more creative in that way, which leads me to sort of my next conversation. Heather, you mentioned specifically that it's important when adults take that brain break. So I feel like interpreting that for me means that when I'm working, I should take time out to play, whether that's to I always say to my kids, move your big muscles, right? Get out and just move your big muscles. Get out and run up and down the driveway, throw a basketball for 10 minutes. What is the version for kids of a brain break if play is their work? How do we help give them the break that they need? And I think in my experience, kids often just take it naturally. They just literally will wander away. They're done with you, they walk off. He's not my friend anymore. I am, I just don't want to be, and they'll tell you, I just don't want to be here right now. Okay. You know, there's no social skills, but what does that look like in your experiences in the medical field, in the classroom? What do you think?
Oh, I don't know. Laura, did you want to answer in the classroom first?
I think they just naturally will go sit in a corner, or they will go to a table. I'm thinking we have a wonderful playground, and I observe them a lot. And kids are constantly, they're taught to take a break. And that's not a bad thing. It's a time to get your body back on green, which means that you're ready to interact. And they also do it naturally when they are playing out on the playground. So, I mean, it's a hand-in-hand social-emotional learning opportunity, but a lot of it comes naturally.
In our preschools, it's built in naturally, and I think sometimes it's the opposite. They have to build in the down times for those kids and allow for those opportunities for them to go off to their quiet spaces. You lose it sometimes when you get into those elementary, middle, and high school years, and it's really up to the individual teachers to have opportunities to build that into the classroom, whether it is through playful learning that keeps them motivated, whether it is, you know, a standing break, an opportunity to walk around that classroom and do something silly or do something fun, bringing out some fidgets and like blowing their mind because you're allowing them the opportunity for a specific moment in time to utilize something, you know, have a box in your classroom, have some of those oddities that you can pass around, everybody can pick one, and then everybody's got to put it back in, you know, 2 minutes later, set a small timer, and allow them the opportunity to put it back. If you've got the ability to have the ball seats instead of the typical chairs in your classroom or different types of sitting. I know in Montessori, my daughter also goes to First State, they're sitting on rugs often to do their work, and they're not sitting at a typical table.
So I'm going to bring us back to, we mentioned a little bit about social emotional learning. Anybody hearing that in their work environment, right? I'm seeing a lot of this, right? A lot of SEL, a lot of emphasis on social emotional learning. And I think a good way to kind of wrap up this conversation is to recognize the really critical importance of play in social emotional learning, social and emotional development. And after we have a brief commentary on that, then I want to turn it over to questions from all of you, because we're really looking to engage in your questions and your own experiences as it relates to the types of play and what those can bring to us. So go ahead, jump in on SEL.
So my experience as a school counselor when I was going in the classroom was I really wanted to focus on teaching them teamwork, because a lot of the children that I was working with really didn't have experience with that. And coming with a focus on teamwork, you're encompassing every SEL there is in the book, because you're learning to take turns, you're thinking about the perspective of others, you're working together to accomplish a goal, your brain is growing cognitively, and I lost my thought.
Maybe you need a brain break.
I do. That's what I was thinking before about how we have to model for our kids taking those brain breaks. So when we're playing, like, I'm really tired now, I want to sit down. So going back to SEL skills, plays that natural way to express their emotions, and it's a feeling their experiences of power or lack of power, and you want to allow them to make the world the way they want it to be.
I love that. Heather?
Social emotional learning. I was thinking it from a parent perspective, right? What can you do? You take advantage of the library system that we have and the fantastic programs to read to the pets, programs that exist to, my daughter brought a stuffed animal for a stuffed animal sleepover to the local library, and the staff there took photos of it, and then, with the other stuffed animals doing cool sleepover things, and then she got those back, and she was able to create whole stories about this little dinosaur's experience. She got to use her brain and use those skills. Take advantage of the local parks and recreation, because so much of social emotional wellness also has to do with physical wellness and expending your endorphins and making sure that you're getting fresh air. So taking advantage as a family of our local parks and getting out as a teacher or as a therapist, like universal design, which talks about buildings, also applies to education and learning social emotional skills. I think of the individuals that I work with who do have autism or who have had intellectual and developmental neurodiversities, and when I have to think very specifically about programs to develop these skills, that Laura has forementioned in my play, those are things that I would naturally be doing with my own children or with children that I work with in my community involvements as well, as a Girl Scout leader, as a church member, and a Sunday school leader. So working with these full groups, if I'm meeting the needs of those who have delays, if I'm meeting the needs of those who have diversities, I can meet the needs of those children who are neurotypical as well.
I also use opportunity when I'm working with kids in play to get them to, for impulse control, I will have them play a game, and then along with that, I want them to, let's say if they skip or they grab the toy, whether it's their turn or not, I'll take a moment back and I'll say, well, what is the other person thinking right now? I want them to understand that they're feeling frustrated or they're feeling angry, and I also say that anger is an okay feeling, but that person who has a need for better impulse control has to start understanding very explicitly. You have to tell them that other people are feeling frustrated, they don't want to play with you. How can you get them engaged so that they want to be your friend, essentially?
I think that is a really nice way to sort of wrap up what we had prepared to talk about, but now we want to really give time for all of you to ask questions from our panelists who have so much experience in this area in terms of the value of play, the inherent value of play and what it can bring to therapy, medical settings, classrooms. Who has questions for us and them? Mostly them.
Can I do one thing before? Earlier I asked you guys to look on your tables and to grab the items that were around you to think about what value they had. So I'm just curious, if you have an object that you think could help with social emotional learning, can you hold it up? All right. So I see our kissing pigs, and I see crayons and markers and Play-Doh, right? To sculpt seeds, right? Oh, to see about growth. Think about the curriculum that you could develop around growth. It's everywhere, guys. It's everywhere. If you really do a thorough activity analysis of any toy, I guarantee you can find something that it benefits in the social, the physical, emotional, and cognitive domain, and it's really exciting when you start to make those connections, because then whatever the need is for the child that you're with, for the adult that you're with, or the geriatric community that you're with, you have the tools to be able to intentionally lead them in the direction towards the growth that they need to have.
I love that. Questions? Oh, I've got Leslie, jump in. Okay, so Leslie's question was, what are the museums in our community doing well? We already heard from Heather on what some of the libraries are doing well, and like, we don't deserve librarians. Like, are the librarians just so amazing? They come up with these brilliant experiences for families, for kids. I'm always so amazed. I'm a huge library nerd. But what are our museums able to provide in this avenue, and what do we need them to provide?
Well, again, I'm going to date myself. I used to live in West Philadelphia, and I'd walk over on Sunday mornings to the Children's Museum, the Please Touch, because it was free on Sunday mornings. But that provided, you know, there's the Where the Wild Things Are exhibits there, and the children could dress up and act out the stories. In my opinion, children's museums should be all about providing them opportunities to play, whether it's the water play, playing on a bus. The Children's Museum in Philadelphia still offers a lot. I haven't been to the Children's Museum here. Sorry.
That's okay. You know,
I think there's a field trip coming.
I know. You can always come with me and Elise.
I will.
So my daughter, both of my daughters often use the Delaware Children's Museum, and the sensory experiences, I mean, they are meant to enrich social, emotional, cognitive, physical growth. So they hit every spot if you go around it. I would love to see more live animals in the tank. That's my plug. So I would love to see more, you know, animals to touch, since we don't have an aquarium other than New Jersey. So that's my plug to Jen. But aside from that, I think they are continuing to think about that. I've been to the Contemporary on certain occasions where they have had installations that are child-friendly, and I'm thinking of Mount Cuba most recently, but I believe the Contemporary has done it as well, where they have almost like scavenger hunts or find-its intentionally planted throughout, so that can keep the children's interests as they go into each room. But interactive learning is what the takeaway is from any museum, if there's a component of interactive learning.
I'm going to share a quick story about an early experience at the Delaware Children's Museum. Jen knows that I was part of the team that did communications and fund development when the Children's Museum was being built here on the riverfront. And at the opening night celebration, we had then Vice President Joe Biden come and give a talk to the guests at the opening night party. And it was a big deal fundraising event for the museum. It was incredibly exciting. And as part of the team there, I was there in the days leading up to this event. And the Secret Service would come, because they do this as part of their advance. They come and they check out the doors in and out of buildings. They want to make sure it's a safe environment for their protectee. And Jen, do you remember this? The Secret Service played in every inch of that museum. They would tell us, well, we just got to make sure this is working okay. They threw every basketball. They rode on those little rowing machines. They had their hands on the water table, every aspect of it. And it was really such a beautiful example of, you know, these serious men in serious, like, suits with their ear things, just playing, hanging on the pull-up bar and playing. And I think that really speaks to how we never lose the desire to play. Somebody said earlier that whenever there's freedom, there's an opportunity for play. And so I really have enjoyed this conversation about how we can be better at it, and how it, for those of us who are sort of pressure cooker people, it has really good outcomes. So we should do it because it has really good outcomes, even if it wasn't just for fun.
Doing collaborations like this and having networking opportunities with consultants and community partners is a fantastic way. I know our child life interns at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, each year, each semester, will go to Please Touch Museum and host an event. So that's one example of a community partnership that's been really effective. As a field coordinator at Temple University, I have partnerships for classes where some of our students go in and lead 6-week programs with some of the geriatric communities and adult communities with neurodiversities, and the after-school programs as well in some of our inner-city programs. So trying to meet the need for children who don't have access to all the things and don't necessarily know how to utilize those less expensive or low-cost, no-cost play options in really structured and effective ways, given that option. And then I thought of another too is the Queen. Also, we don't talk about music a lot today, but the Queen also has their PB and Jams in the afternoon, or their New Year's at noon programming. But music, of course, has such significant benefits as well for children for social-emotional learning.
I remember taking my children when they were much younger to an instrument petting zoo where they could just explore instruments on their own. And I see Mary Jane Taylor here, who I worked with on family programming years and years ago. For all of you who don't know, Winterthur Museum has a small space in the main area of the gallery entrance area, and they have a room. Mary Jane, help me remember what it's called. The touch room. And they have sort of replica and some actually, you know, decorative art examples, and kids can just play. Everything from the Dutch shoes that early settlers wore to dishes and pewter pots. And it's a great way to experience material culture in a playful way. And I think that when I think about what museums do in terms of play, it's when they bring their museum or their artistic specialty to a playful place or a playful interpretation that really, it's sort of the beautiful marriage of arts, culture, and play all together. So Leslie, if that's an answer to your question, that's what I think the museums do the best, when they bring their own unique collection or exhibit style to a playful opportunity.
I think museums also play a really important role in exposing the children to a diverse population, peers that they don't normally see or play with, and it broadens their world. And I think that's the beauty of museums.
Yes, I see a question. Oh, the Enchanted Woods. That's okay. Thank you.
You made such a good point, because that's where my mind was going. That sensory enriching and that sensory calming combination is necessary on both ends of that spectrum to involve in any of your museum exhibits.
I also want to point out that everyone here believes in play, and it's in the parks, it's in the playgrounds, it's in the museums, it's in all aspects of our lives, because we know how important it is. And what we need to do is meld those beliefs along with theories of learning that we also believe in, and put it together and bring it back to the classroom.
Yep, if we have one more, go ahead. Right.
In recreational therapy, we have models that are solely devoted to that continuum. And oftentimes, in order to educate, in order to enrich and provide new opportunities and new ideas to people, you have to start with that highly structured recreation experience. But the idea and the goal is to get it to a place where ultimately that individual is most independent and doing it on their own. And so, they've developed those skills, and they've developed the abilities, they've learned the adaptive techniques if needed to be able to be motivated to do it on their own and be able to thrive and do it on their own. Sometimes it's the opposite way for children. They start with all this free play, and they start with the opportunity to birth to 5, just experience and learn through doing. And then as they're getting older, there's much more structure. I think from a play learning perspective, it's quite usually the opposite, if they're even allowed to use play in that education. But from a therapy perspective, we usually do top down.
And I think if it's achievement oriented, if that's your goal for the structured play, the achievement, I think you're defeating the purpose of play.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for allowing us to have this time with you. We're so excited to be here.